Season 3 non-spoiler review of Game of Thrones. With first season, they had a lot of production problems behind the scenes, and with the second season, they had a little bit more money, but they still had to be very careful with the budget, and I thought the writing was lacking in certain places. But with this one, I am happy to report we are literally getting the best of any form of television. The writing, the directing, the acting, the costumes, special effects. Everything is really working together. It's probably going to be one of the best fiction pieces you're ever going to encounter. And it is diverging sharply from the books. Let's not lie about that. It is moving in its own direction, but at this state of the game, what you do like is Benioff and Weiss are still working with mostly the book material. They are doing their own thing, but it's still having a kind of healthy dialogue back and forth with George and what he intended the story to be. So what's happening? Well, essentially we're getting a deepening of the war between Robb and Joffrey, which I thought was very fascinating and interesting. Robb is much older than he is in the books, and it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of what they're trying to do and what they're going to set up. I won't ruin it, but I think it makes sense in terms of like why Robb does what he does, and it's a very big theme of this season of how the heart and love and passion can betray you. And we're seeing the aftermath of season 2 where Stannis fails, right? He fails to grab King's Landing. He's kind of angry with himself and angry with his subordinates, and we're going to get more on him and Davos and the kind of way that Melisandre and him are kind of vying for Stannis' favor and trying to move forward and trying to recoup his losses. But probably the standout here is really what's happening with Jon at the Wall, and we're finally seeing a lot of dramatic movement in terms of him becoming more and more kind of a leadership role, and the way he slowly accumulates more experience and just gets into these tons of fights. We also get a big preview of the White Walkers and what they're up to. So a lot of things are happening and being seeded very expertly for the future seasons. Of course, when they happen, unfortunately, they're kind of done disappointingly, but the setups are very, very powerful. The only one I probably have a major issue with is the Theon story and just how that's eventually worked out. Let's just say it's going to become a key character, and just the way the key character works for me, he's basically just a really stupid cartoon cat. And he starts off good. You're like, okay, this is just weird and unusual, but that character would act that way. But then he does things which in this universe which are just so radically illogical and would immediately just raise an eyebrow. But here it's like, he just does that kind of stuff. You just got to get used to him. He's a kind of lovable psychopath, basically. And you're like, okay, I guess. So the Theon part, I could never really take seriously because that is way too ridiculous. And I know he's a fan favorite, but I don't hate the actors. I just think the direction there was just way too loopy, and it's clearly derivative of Hannibal and Silence of the Lambs and things like that. So it's like, okay, that was a little disappointing. And in terms of Brienne and Jaime, that's very, very mixed as well. I will say it's better than the books. The books are famously boring when they get together. I don't mind that as much as other people. I do find the kind of world building fascinating. They do have a little bit of critical details in the books, but they've gotten rid of that in the show entirely. It's a much, much more drawn out, and it has many more people. So it's here just them two traveling along and getting into all these misadventures, which I can appreciate for its own thing. Although, again, I am being a critic, right? That's what I'm hoping to be paid for. And as a critic, you will notice certain plot problems, even problems with choreography. They get certain things wrong. If you look closely at the scenes, they're like, wait, the sword was on this hand, now it's on this hand. So they are kind of screwing up little bits and pieces. And again, I want to be fair-minded. I'm still going to give this a really high score of 8.5. I would highly recommend this. I would say between this and Season 4 and Season 1, just for backstory, that's really prime Game of Thrones. Those are probably the best seasons of Game of Thrones. So yes, there are little flaws that accumulate, but there are so many good things, like the introduction of the Brothers Without Banners, Arya's story, Jon becoming a more capable swordsman, and things like that. Even the slower stories they're fine. I mean, again, with Bran, it's very functional of him becoming more powerful and gaining more, abilities like warging and things like that. It's like, it is just what it is. I just don't think they found the right tack with Bran, so his adventures tend to drag everything down. But once we get back to the center stage with the Wall, with King's Landing, and the drama happening with Marjorie and facing off against Cersei, and then both trying to manipulate Joffrey as well as Tywin getting into the mix. Those are really well done. They're really enjoyable. They're really funny. It's probably one of the funniest seasons in television of all time. It's just so hilarious. I would say my own major thing, though, with the season is they try to do too much with Tyrion in terms of making him too much into a good guy, whereas in the books, he's much more indifferent, doesn't really care about Sansa, is much more of a power broker. He does show mercy, but here they just make him a kind of very tragic hero who wants to be good and is sort of just reluctantly going along with Tywin. And that's not him at all in the books. He's much more active in killing off people and being very brutal with people. So I thought that was probably a tactical error. I mean, I understand they want to make him more likable, but I think they went way too far. It would have been better for Tyrion and Littlefinger to be sort of in the same gray zone. And here they sharply distinguish, like, Littlefinger's really evil. Like, there is no doubt in your mind this guy is incredibly evil, and sort of Varys and Tyrion look really good in comparison. And I think that was just wrong. I think they could have still done a really sharp contrast without being cartoonish. So there are still places where, again, it's Benioff and Weiss. They're not the best writers, but here they have such a strong structure. And I would even say, I'll be fair, even Benioff's episodes, which he directs, they're not bad. So you kind of see why it did work with the show for a while. They're competent enough writers that when they have a good structure, if they stay within the structure, they mostly do good work. But when they start straying, it doesn't really work. They don't have the minds to do their own thinking, unfortunately. So a lot of little flaws. So I'm going to give it an 8.5. Again, 8.5 of all television, so that's amazingly good. That's really good. It's not up there with like the best of Angel or Sons of Anarchy or some really great epic fantasy show. So it's still lacking. I mean, I still find when Dany gets more and more power, those parts were absolutely boring and dreadful for me. I don't care about all those things. The only really interesting part was Dario being introduced, and he brought a lot of life and energy to it. But other words, her machinations were always the most boring and stupid parts of the story. So when they keep checking back on her, I'm like, I just want that to be over. I think Emilia's fine as an actress, but I just don't care about Dany. I don't care about her quest. I don't care about her screaming about usurpers or her name, blah, 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 blah. So they're still not finding a right way to balance all the characters, but imbalance or not, it's mostly excellent on all fronts. Costumes, acting, pacing, structure, foreshadowing. But again, you can already see where things are going to go wrong because they do start pivoting the narrative into their own direction. And you think it's going to go one way, but it does not. And so a lot of promise, but judging it in its own terms, an excellent story so far. Unfortunately, it's going to get more and more worse as we go along. Unfortunately. All right, this has been a spoiler-free review of Season 3 of Game of Thrones. Thanks for listening.